Welcome to another episode of the Untold Story of the Protestant Reformation, episode 13. In this episode, we are continuing on with the events, happenings, and details of the year 1521. On April 17th of 1521, Martin Luther is brought before the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. It's a packed house at the Bishop's Palace in Worms. Princes, dukes, magistrates, priests, theologians, bishops, and several administrators from the papal court. Luther is shown to a table where there are several stacks of his books and writings. A spokesperson for Charles V simply asks Luther, "Are these your writings?" After rummaging through the several titles, Martin Luther acknowledges that they are his books. The spokesperson then follows up with the question, "Do you want to recant?" Luther is caught off guard by the simplicity of the proceedings. He thought he was going to have to debate. In his confusion, he asks for 24 hours to contemplate his decision. Charles V grants his request, and Luther leaves for the day. During the evening, Luther is meeting with Frederick the Wise and all his advisors on what they should do next. The following day, Martin Luther stands before Charles V, claiming that he cannot recant because he won't go against his conscience. You've probably heard this famous response supposedly said by Martin Luther to Charles V, where he says, "Here I stand, I can do no other." Like so many parts of this story, that's another embellishment. It didn't really happen. It was added later. And speaking of embellishments, after the meeting with Charles V, there are conflicting stories as to what happened next. The main narrative that we've been given is that Martin Luther left that meeting, jumped on a horse, bolted out of town, rode all night long trying to get back to safety in Wittenberg. Sometime during that trek, he was kidnapped by mercenaries hired by Frederick the Wise, who took him and stored him away at Wartburg Castle. This looks to be another one of Martin Luther's wild imagination stories about chivalry and King Arthur, because this didn't happen either. The reality is, Martin Luther and his companions stayed in the town of Worms for a couple more days. Then Charles V's procession escorted them back, starting with the boat, going all the way back and all the way up to Wittenberg. Then, on May 4th, under Frederick the Wise's advisement, Martin Luther went to Wartburg Castle. One story that I heard was that after Martin Luther's response to Charles V, Martin Luther left the palace where Frederick the Wise was waiting for him with a big stout of beer and a big smile, congratulating him that Martin Luther did not recant on any of his books. In the days that followed the Diet of Worms, while Martin Luther and his companions are still staying in town, Martin met Ulrich von Hutten. Ulrich von Hutten could be called a reformer, but he's more like an anarchist. He doesn't like the Catholic Church, but he doesn't like the rulers, nobles, or magistrates in Germany either. He wants a revolution. He wants a civil war. He's a big fan of Martin Luther, and he wants Martin Luther to start the revolution. Ulrich is agitated at Luther's resistance to civil war, along with his loyalty to nobles, princes, and dukes. Ulrich and his band of revolutionary zealots start to see Martin Luther as a stooge or a toady. This label will stick to Martin Luther like glue for the rest of his life. Other reformers and critics will take fault at Martin's above and beyond adoration and devotion towards the German elite. Martin Luther's defense for his cronyism, he says, is biblical. He cites Romans chapter 13, verse 1, where St. Paul says everyone is subject to the governing authorities because God has put the governing authorities in place. Now let's just pause for one quick second here. Martin Luther is going to use Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to defend anything that the princes, dukes, and magistrates do because God has given them the authority. Go read Romans chapter 13, verse 1, and then try to explain to yourself how the Catholic Church is not included as a governing authority. Not only is Romans chapter 13, verse 1 hilariously hypocritical for Martin Luther, it actually refutes sola scriptura, your sole authority. Anyway, several weeks after the Diet had concluded, Martin Luther was given the verdict. He is now an outlaw. They issue the Edict of Worms, which says that no one can produce, publish, print any books done by Martin Luther. All Martin Luther publications are banned. Luther goes to hide out for 10 months in a hunting castle of Frederick the Wise's called Wartburg Castle. Meanwhile, as Renaissance artists like Michelangelo are creating iconic masterpieces such as the creation of Adam, and King Francis I is bringing Leonardo da Vinci's masterpiece, the Mona Lisa, to Paris, Lucas Cranach and Philip Melanchthon are keeping it classy in Wittenberg with this woodcut piece called The Pastoral of Jesus Christ. Now, art historians claim that this is one of the most famous propaganda pieces of the Protestant Reformation. If you can't tell what's going on, you're not alone. I can't either. I had to read the description that says, while Jesus is casting out the money changer in the temple, the Pope is the Antichrist and is on the side of the money changer. Good one, Luke and Phil. You really inspired the masses. In the summer of 1521, King Henry VIII publishes a treatise criticizing Martin Luther's freedom of a Christian and his ideas of sacraments. Later on that year, Pope Leo X will grant King Henry VIII the honorary title of Defender of the Faith. In December of 1521, a couple things happen. Number one, Albrecht of Mainz opens up his own museum of relics to compete with Frederick the Wise's Museum of Relics in Wittenberg. Remember, Albrecht is one of those electors. This is what he's obviously doing with some of that money that he got from the election of 1519. In his museum, he has a lot of the same items. He's got a thorn from the crown of thorns, a branch from the burning bush, a piece of the true cross, but he's also got breast milk from Mary and 2 jugs of wine from the wedding of Cana found in John's Gospel, chapter 2. And true to form, although stored away in Wartburg Castle, it didn't hinder Martin Luther from writing a nasty letter to Albrecht demanding that Albrecht close his idol of holly for the good of the people. Yes, another instance where Martin Luther is fighting for the people. His intentions and his motivations are so ambiguous and mysterious. Who knows what he's thinking at this point? Yes, Frederick the Wise's museum is still open for business. Also in December of 1521, Pope Leo X dies. And the last event of the year 1521 is a big one, a monumental one. That is the Christmas Mass being held in Wittenberg on December 25th. Martin Luther is still in hiding, leaving Andreas Karlstadt, Philip Melanchthon, and some of the other boys in charge of the Christmas Mass. They come up with a plan to start instituting their new reforms at the biggest Mass of the year. One of their reforms is allowing the laity to drink the wine at Eucharist. Up until this point, the Catholic Church has only allowed the priests to drink the wine. On top of allowing the laity to drink the wine, the boys also allow members of the laity to distribute the host and the wine throughout Eucharist. While the plan backfires, the laity reject the new reforms as well as the members of Wittenberg and Frederick the Wise. The commotion is an eye-opening experience for Frederick the Wise and his lackeys. No one is ready for his reforms, nor do they want them. Keep in mind that Frederick the Wise's Castle Church is not the only church in Wittenberg. There were 4 other churches. There was also another order of monks, the Franciscan monks, located in Wittenberg. Public opinion for Frederick the Wise and his Augustinian order of monks changed dramatically. Martin Luther had to return to Wittenberg in order to quell the situation. Later, Andreas Karlstadt will take the role of fall guy, and he will be expelled from Saxony altogether. What this story of the Christmas Mass tells us is this idea or belief that the Protestant Reformation was this religious revolution or wave of acceptance by the people is false. Here at the Protestant Reformation ground zero, Wittenberg, the people and the laity rejected it.